This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com, where today we are getting you set for the NBA playoffs by talking about the conclusion of the regular season and taking a quick peek at the futures market with Drew Disnick, whale capper, swinging by today to break down NBA futures and what he sees on the board. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Dr. Ed Feng. You can find his work over at thepowerrank.com. And Ed, NBA season is starting to come to a close. They've got that crazy blitz coming up on Sunday with all the games starting at the same time. I've barely paid attention to NBA this year, which is why I don't talk about it here on the podcast. What about you? What's your level of investment in the NBA right now?
Yeah, I love basketball. Played so much growing up, love the game, kind of wish I had more time, but, you go through March Madness and that's all consuming. And then April, every year I go through April and I'm more consumed by the draft. Right. But now, it's time to start thinking about the NBA. So interested in talking to Drew today. I really, I feel a little bit embarrassed to say that I'm kind of an NBA playoffs fan because that's kind of most people out there. And that clearly doesn't make me an expert in terms of what to bet by any means,
that's why we have the experts on.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what the experts are for. There's a reason we have them on, and I'm talking NASCAR and not talking NBA.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just with the way this...
What?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just excited for the playoffs. I think things are really interesting with the Nets this year, with the Lakers being so low in the standings. I think there's a lot of intrigue. There's a lot of betting that's going to go way outside anything that numbers can kind of tell you.
Yep.
With superstars like LeBron being hurt and things like that. I think that makes it interesting. And since I actually ran zero NBA numbers this year, kind of the first time I haven't even run the team rankings, since I put up my site, honestly.
Right.
So... from my perspective, I can't do everything. So some things kind of go by the wayside. So it's, for me, this month is going to be kind of looking at what experts like Drew think and going from there.
If we can't be informed on everything, I definitely cannot be informed on the NBA because that'd be starting from ground zero. So that's why we lean on people like Drew. You can find him on Twitter at whale_capper. You can also find him on his new podcast. It's the Bet the Edge podcast on NBC Sports Edge with him and Sarah Perlman. We're going to talk to him about that, the new podcast, NBC Life. We're going to talk to him about the NBA futures market, playoffs being around the corner. Drew is still doing the Deep Dive podcast, so fans of that can still find him there. Make sure you do so as well. We'll get his read on the NBA futures market. Also, this week, FanDuel win totals went up for the NFL for this year. If you want some thoughts on which teams you may want to buy into, we had an NFL discussion last week with Kevin Cole of Pro Football Focus talking about takeaways from free agency and the draft and which teams he is buying into for this year. I'll have some win total talk in my Covering the Future for this week as well. But if you want to find the talk with Kevin about NFL improvements, go to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, you name it, we're there. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe and leave a rating and review as well. Before we talk to Drew, though, got to go back to last week. We had some NASCAR on the podcast, and it kind of seems like we got a little hot streak going with NASCAR right now.
Covering the past.
So last week, a good week here on the podcast. I had NASCAR at Darlington, a second consecutive good week there. I was in a Martin Truex Jr. and Alex Bowman. Truex outright. Bowman, I had podium and top 10 bets. Bowman didn't pan out. He had tire issues. Didn't have enough time to work his way back through the pack. Had some speed at one point, but no win there. But Truex worked out really well. I had him at plus 750 for the outright. He took the lead on lap 22. He basically never looked back. He led 248 out of 293 laps, just dominated the race. Did get a late challenge from Kyle Larson, but held him off and got the win. So plus 750, not a super long number, but I had him at 14% in my win simulations. The implied at 7-1 is 12.5%. There were some 8s hanging out there as well. I think DraftKings had him at 8-1. So either way, there was an edge in the sims. It played out to perfection. Truex dominated. Feel pretty good about that. I think he's plus 350 this week. So good luck with that. I'll hold off for this week for sure. And Ed, you were on the Mets. You talking about the Mets and how cluster luck had been working against them. In the time since then, the Mets are 6-1. That is despite Jacob deGrom getting like half or 2/3 of a start in that time due to some more side tightness. So a good week for the podcast here between the Mets and NASCAR.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not like I bet the Mets recently, but it's good to know that they're coming back based on the analytics. I still think that baseball market is really hard, but if you did, if you did, I hope you did. Yeah, we'll continue to try to give advice like that.
And they will need to keep it up with DeGrom on the injured list now. So
Sure.
we'll hope they keep on swinging a hot stick to get that record continuing in the right direction. We're going to talk to Drew Disnick in just 1 second. But first, the Preakness is just around the corner, and FanDuel Racing is helping you get in on the action. FanDuel will match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $50 when you open a new racing account. That is free money you can use to turn race day into payday. There is no promo code needed. Just download the FanDuel Racing app and make your first deposit, and you're off to the races. The app is super easy to use. Most payouts occur in a matter of minutes. Start building your bankroll today. Be ready for the race on Saturday this week. Because it's not the Preakness without any stakes, it's one of Baltimore's greatest sporting traditions, and it just got even greater. Download the FanDuel Racing app and make your first deposit and get up to $50 for free on FanDuel. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel Racing app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's talk to Drew Disnick now. Get his read on the NBA futures market. Again, you can find him on Twitter at whale_capper, the NBC Sports Edge, Bet the Edge podcast as well, and the Deep Dive podcast. Let's check in with Drew and see which futures we should be betting as the NBA grinds towards the end of its regular season.
Covering the present.
Let's bring Drew Disnick into covering the spread to talk some NBA with the regular season winding down. And Drew, you're a busy guy. You got that NBC money coming in. How you doing now?
The NBC is such a cool kind of way to come up in the space. You know, we're reaching a broader audience now, communicating about sports betting the right way. This has been a ton of fun, and we're doing daily content now as in the betting space for NBC, which is sweet.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting when big companies decide to go people who understand the sphere, understand like the nuance of it. So I was excited when I saw that you had gotten this gig with you and Sarah Perlman. I think that's a fantastic hire for them. But I mean, for you now, like you've got your full-time job still, you've got your bets you're making, you've got the Deep Dive podcast still. You're kind of doing a lot of stuff. How has the time management been so far?
So far, so good. It is certainly going to be interesting come fall. When NFL season rolls around, that tends to suck a lot of time. And, it's going to be a balancing act for sure once we get there. And actually, honestly, NBA playoffs coming up is going to be an interesting thread the needle as well for sure. But without a question, kind of continuing to create and provide what I think is, a pretty important, content that reaches the recreational plus the professional bettor in a way that they have something to really chew on when it comes to handicapping, I think is important. And hopefully we're filling that niche.
Now, are you still going to get to do tennis stuff for them too, or are you just doing NBA, NFL right now?
French Open coming up, knock on wood. I'll get involved in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, good to hear.
Drew,
good to hear.
I mean, no one really needs earthquake engineering to build buildings in Southern California, right?
We haven't had an earthquake in LA in a long time. People forget it, but what
there
it's
you
like
go.
now. Yeah.
There you go. Who cares about the day job, right? We gotta, the daily content's definitely going to be keeping you busy.
Yep, earthquakes are so 1990s.
Well, that's glad. I'm glad you got the new podcast. Glad things are going well, and happy you still have time to talk with us for a little bit. And let's talk about some NBA. And this is the last time we get to talk to you before the playoffs, and we're probably not going to have time, to do like individual game stuff once the playoffs do get here. So, wanted to pick your brain a bit about alterations you make when you're betting the playoffs, because things obviously change, rotations tighten, stuff like that. Are there things you have to adjust to account for that with as far as like must-win games go, and any other adjustments you make that we may overlook when it comes to betting playoff games?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's like a different sport. It's really like handicapping a different sport. Regular season NBA, and actually this year has been closer to my playoff approach just because we've had so many clusters of games where you have had common opponents. It's made it a little bit more important to try to kind of sift through, what the market is doing in some of these spots and try to identify value. But when it comes to the playoffs, there are a couple of key things that differ for me. Number one, this season during the regular season, I've focused solely on sides. I've completely abandoned totals. That was like a specific decision for this season, considering there were no fans. I didn't know what the impact was going to be on shooting, and the impact was massive. The amount of 3-point shots that are going in right now is at a rate that you would barely believe it was possible if you had the last 20 years of data. And sure enough, without the noise, without the fan distraction, guys are hitting open threes at historic rates. Offensive efficiencies, like I think 5 or of the top 6 all-time offensive efficiencies are all this season's teams. And Wow. It's just like that, that sort of stuff. If you can't see it coming, if you're not prepared for it from a betting standpoint, and then you're betting into totals, like best of luck to you. So I swerved on totals for the regular season. That ended up being a great decision. But come playoffs, most of my edges that I think are especially meaningful end up being totals, and it kind of comes back to the fact that you know what's going to happen in a 7-game series with a spread between two teams, assuming that there are no meaningful injuries. They're running out the same lineup every day. It's not like baseball series where you get a different starting pitcher every night. So there's going to be a little bit of fabric to what the line's, telling you. NBA, it is the same 7-8 guys. You're getting the same expected minutes night in, night out. The only thing that changes in an NBA series is venue. After the first couple of games. So so how the side matures over the course of a 7-game series, it becomes less and less valuable to bet into the side. Because come game 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, you're basically betting a coin flip on the side. The total, in my opinion, is a little different because it's anchored to whatever they open that total in game 1. And there can be factors that are unaccountable in game 1 that once you see it play out, you can incorporate into game 2. Oh, surprise, this team decided that they were going to run, a faster pace than they have on average during the season because they thought that's, suited their advantage. Okay, well, now that we know that and we rerun what the fair total ought to be in game 2, it's off by 5 points. Right. Those sort of, opportunities do manifest in the totals market over the course of the series, which I think is pretty important to kind of key on. And then the other way to play a series from a game by game betting standpoint is to, just to try to evaluate, okay, this coach does this when the going gets tough. Right. When he is running, when Team X shuts off their transition offense, they go with these sets. And then will that work against this defense? And if the answer is yes, then, they have a chance to come back in the series. If the answer is no, then, bombs away on the favorite. Right. So you can kind of find some indicators from how coaches handle adversity and what their go-to adjustments are going to be, because in-series adjustments kind of tend to dominate a lot of the a 7-game series, or lack of adjustments in the case of, say, the Milwaukee Bucks. They're for sure are kind of read between the lines. This is what this coach does, and we can use that to inform, whether we should get involved with this team now that we're seeing the market give them enough extra couple points, if they're down 3-1.
So with your totals numbers, do you need to abandon all pre-2020, 2021 data as a result of what you've seen during the regular season? Or how are you adjusting that if you are going to dive back in to the totals market for the postseason?
Yeah, so a couple important assumptions I'm making heading in. I think my data from previous seasons, particularly playoff series, is going to be valid because there are going to be some fans in pretty much every arena. I think Portland is the only one that we're still waiting on confirmation that there'll be fans in the lower bowl. And in my opinion, at least, the way the game was reffed and the way that shot lines were undisturbed and noise was not a factor really was what played into the offensive efficiency boom we saw, much more so than, say, the schedule being compressed and players being tired. Like those are kind of the two competing theories that I've heard as to why the offensive efficiency was so high this year. And so I'm guessing that it's going to feel more like a typical NBA game come playoffs, than what we saw from a lot of stretches during the regular season. So I think my guess is it's going to be valid. That said, if we are proven, that said, we're probably going to be anchored with a lot of totals that are reflecting what we saw during the regular season. And so we may see, a fair amount of unders early. If there's an over adjustment, you may see some overs in the next wave. So that those are things I'll look out for. But I'll be pretty quick to adjust on if my thesis is proven incorrect.
Excellent. So, Drew, you always seem to have a pretty good read on when to buy teams' futures based on schedule and changes. Are there any teams that stand out right now in the futures market?
There are. And this is not a great answer, unfortunately, because they're not the long shots. Although I will say, I guess I've been kind of beating the same message into the back of my head for the entire NBA season, which is do not overreact to the regular season. The teams that really are going to rise at the end of this it's going to be the Nets in the East. It's going to be the Clippers and Lakers in the West. Don't overthink this. Don't worry about standing. Don't worry about, path. Like those teams, they have the premier players. And oh, by the way, they haven't really gone through the same rigor as a lot of the other teams over the course of the regular season, just based on they've been able to give these guys rest. Now they've been recovering from injury. The Lakers pretty obviously are not perfectly healthy. Even Anthony Davis last night limping around against the Knicks is a somewhat of a concern if you're a Lakers future holder, as I am. But ultimately I think the cream will rise here. As I currently project the standings for the Western Conference, that does manifest a small edge on Phoenix, and it comes entirely down to path. Phoenix is likely to draw the Warriors as the 8th seed by my numbers, and I think really what I'm saying is I think Phoenix gets the 1 ultimately over the Jazz. I think the Jazz are going to stumble here a little bit in the home stretch. Phoenix I think gets the 1. I expect them to draw the Warriors in the 1-8 matchup. The Warriors, the public, beautiful spot for the public to get involved with the Warriors there, may warp that series price a bit to where Phoenix is a value to bet in series there. Like fair series price is probably about minus 700, minus 800 for the Suns there. I can see like a 400 or a 500 out there, which would be a fun way to kind of just, sweat a little heavy juice on round 1 of the NBA playoffs. But I'll probably get involved with the Suns against the Warriors if that's what we see. And then the 4-5 between the Nuggets and the Mavericks potentially is those are two very flawed teams. And whoever emerges from that series to take on the Suns in round 2 of the playoffs, I think sets up favorably for the Suns to get to the Western Conference Finals. And then, potentially any path for any of these teams that ultimately avoids Lakers Clippers in round 2 is going to be huge. And if you can get to the Western Conference Finals, if you're hosting the Western Conference Finals, and you're playing let's say Lakers Clippers square off in round 2, and that's just a battle to the death, 7-game series, blood on the floor kind of a situation, then Phoenix kicking their feet up after dispatching the Nuggets in 5 or something like that, and playing at home, like you're going to get a pretty favorable start to that series. They could get a 1 or 2 game lead, and at that point you can just come in heavy over the top on the Lakers or Clippers.
So Drew, I'm as kind of a casual NBA fan, I'm a little surprised that Phoenix is at the top of the Western Division. I think we talked on the show about how they kind of surged in the bubble last year, and there was a lack of distraction and a bunch of young players. They clearly have added to their roster. Give us the quick take on what has happened with this team going from just getting into the bubble last year to best record in the West.
Yeah, but I think the bubble was hugely impactful for a lot of these young guys in terms of just taking them from, okay, you're an NBA player, you're making a bunch of money, you're having a lot of fun, to, oh, you're winning. Like this is fun. Like forget about forget about outside of your NBA world. Like we're winning now. Like this is real, and I think that that encouraged some buy-in from guys like Booker, who really needed to take a meaningful step forward in terms of how he plays defense, in terms of how he's willing to kind of share some of the offensive roles. And then you add a guy like Chris Paul, who has just massive experience in this exact type of situation, taking a good young nucleus and elevating some of the play of the of the ancillary players. Like that was a perfect storm. And then the coach like Monty Williams, he gets buy-in from all of these guys during the bubble. He's now understands what he's got in terms of talent and whose roles and responsibilities, who thrives in given what task, what challenge, and has buy-in from all the players. So it really was a perfect storm. And they ended up with a pretty lucky draw schedule-wise. I mean, we knew the Clippers were going to do a lot of load management resting. We didn't know that the Lakers were going to get as hurt as they ended up getting, but that certainly helped the Suns a lot in terms of kind of navigating the Pacific and getting winning their division potentially. I know it's not sewn up just yet, but looks likely to me. And yeah, it's been a pretty cool story. And again, at 6-1 to win the Western Conference, my strategy again is, put that in your pocket now. If the path favors them to not to avoid Clippers and Lakers until the Western Conference Finals, then just be patient. Wait for them to have a 1-0, 2-0 lead in that series, and then then that series price is going to be like -600, or -300, right? And then you can get pretty aggressive coming back the other way on the Lakers or Clippers.
And that's why the schedule is such a key part in betting futures. Knowing when to buy in, knowing when to go reverse of that makes a lot of sense. So Phoenix standing out to Drew right now. You talked about part of the reason you like them is they may face the Warriors in the first round. So let's talk about some teams trying to make the playoffs here over the final 5 days. The Warriors -115 to make it as of right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. Couple of spots still left to be decided. Do you see any value in those markets as of right now?
I do like the Warriors at -115. I give them a 60% shot, a little over 60 actually, 62. So I have a decent edge on -115 to make it. Some of that is speculative in terms of how the how they match up against the Lakers and who the Lakers are even going to have out there in that play-in game. But I ultimately I would make the Warriors about 5-point favorites over whoever wins that 9-10 matchup if they were to lose to the Lakers in say the 7-8, or if they lose to the Portland Trailblazers in the 7-8. So that's a favorable look, but even more shocking, the Charlotte Hornets are +172. That's way off my number. I have the Hornets at almost 50% chance to get in. And when you think of the 7-8 matchup in particular, they likely would take on the Celtics in the 7-8. All they got to do is win one game. And that 7-8, Celtics are without Jaylen Brown. You go back to late April, Celtics were 6-point favorites over the Hornets. Hornets had a couple injuries in that game. Celtics had Jaylen Brown. I wouldn't be surprised if +172 is the money line for the Hornets to win game one, which means, you're basically betting +172 for them, and then you get the free roll of the second home game where they would host the likes of the presumably the Wizards or the Pacers. The Pacers really have fallen apart. I don't 100% know what kind of honest effort you're getting out of this team in terms of the way that their defense has just gone from middle of the pack to like clear 32nd in record time has been mind-blowing. But I would expect that the Charlotte Hornets have better than the implied odds here to get into the mix of 8, and so +172 is pretty interesting to me. That's worse than the Wizards and the Pacers, who both have to win 2 games presumably, which is pretty shocking.
We'll take it.
So Drew, you mentioned lack of effort, and this is actually something I want to bring up with this notion of tanking and teams that are out of the playoff hunt. They're looking for these high-end picks. And, the NBA is a competitive league. You don't see spreads usually greater than 10. Are you seeing any value going against these teams at the very bottom towards this end of the season?
Yeah, for sure. Without question, the from All-Star break through today, the most actionable angle was identifying one of the tanking teams that performed well last time out, and then giving them expecting about a 16th percentile performance next time they played. And that so basically, if you're using your median expectations, then the lines are fair. But if you're expecting them to come out in the 16th to 33rd percentile range, then there was usually like 3 or 4 points of value laying the chalk against whoever was taking on these tanking teams. And that, just off the top of my head, that's been hitting at about a 75% clip. Going back to the All-Star break, because a lot of these teams, they look at they give you an honest effort, they give you a full hard perform, and they are not interested in rallying the next time out. They're not trying to build momentum. They're not trying to accidentally win too many games. They're not trying to take themselves out of lottery position. Even a team like Minnesota, surprisingly, who, if they don't get a top 3 pick, that pick goes to the Warriors. They're playing hard, and I wouldn't put them in that same conversation. But teams like Oklahoma City, they're at the very top of that list. Houston is in the mix there, and then Detroit, Cleveland, and Orlando. Those 5 teams, anytime I have seen them give you an honest effort on a given night, I've gone pretty aggressively against them next time out, and it's been working out like a charm.
That's awesome. Okay, so we're fading the tankers and buying into the Warriors and the Hornets to make the playoffs. Talked a lot about the Western Conference already, so let's talk about the Eastern Conference and try to decide what we see in the futures market right there. The Nets, even money to win the East. 76ers are plus 300. The Bucks plus 330. You talked about not overthinking the regular season, but I feel like the sports books aren't right now based on the number they have on the Nets. Do you see value in the Nets at plus 100, or is there someone else who stands out to you here, or is it a stay away market for you right now?
Yeah, I'm going to hold my nose and take the Nets at the best price I can find them, is what I think it comes down to. Kevin Durant has been unimpressive since coming back from injury, particularly in crunch time games against good teams. However, we haven't seen him be, playing with James Harden really at all this season. But Kyrie Irving looks extremely sharp. I've been impressed with his level of play over the last month or so. If Durant is willing to shed some of the offensive responsibilities in the fourth quarter, and Harden is even close to 100%. There's really no one that matches up well with this Nets team at all in the playoffs. And, I know Harden has a propensity to no-show in the playoffs. I know that, Steve Nash is a completely unproven coach. By the way, he's, D'Antoni, his assistant, hasn't exactly covered himself in glory with playoff adjustments. So there are questions for sure swirling around the Nets, but they're by far the way the most talented starting 5, crunch time 5. And I look at the Philadelphia 76ers and I see some pretty clear limitations. When that second unit is on the floor, it is very lopsided, all defense, no offense. And then, Doc Rivers, obviously in a Game 7 situation, has had a difficult time getting his team across the line, to put it politely. So the Sixers are a little bit of a buyer beware for me, especially at the current prices. And then the Bucks, of course, I will fully admit that I am wearing some bias against them, considering how they treated me last year after having just spectacular prices on the Bucks. Spectacular prices on the Bucks heading into that playoff series, and they go up against the Heat and they never had a chance. And I hang a lot of that on Budenholzer still. They bring in Drew Holiday. They make a couple of roster moves, which were positives. In fact, it looks like general management decided, hey, we're going to give you less depth to force you to play your starters more minutes in the playoffs, which may make sense. But I'm more concerned about what we saw in that Heat series last year, where, number one, if you can take away transition opportunities for the Bucks offensively, their offense gets stagnant and it looks bad. And then if you want to break down what the Bucks do well defensively, they sell out to stop you at the rim, clog the paint, and they give you wide open looks from 3. Again, considering how often the open three has gone in this season, if that is even remotely continues in the playoffs, then they're susceptible to an upset, I would say. If they get it done, if they get over the hump, if they beat a team like the Nets in the 7-game series, all the credit in the world to you. But I'm going to need to see it to believe it before I ever get involved with the Bucks and Budenholzer in particular.
So Drew, I do need to ask. I understand, Adam Stanko was on the show saying that a lot of people in the NBA think the Nets are going to win. But I do have to, how is a team featuring James Harden and Kyrie Irving going to play defense when it matters?
I can't imagine that they will play defense, to be honest with you.
Isn't this a problem?
You would think.
They're just going to outscore you?
They're just going to outrun you. They're just going to outscore you. I guess, let's talk about their path. So they probably draw the Celtics in the 2-7. Celtics, not a great matchup for the Nets, really, in any way, shape, or form. I would expect that there are some competitive moments in a lot of these games, but their ability to turn on the afterburners offensively, particularly when Harden is on the floor, is it's just masterful to watch. And one of the things that the Nets have been lacking since Harden has been out, which has been kind of led to some of their struggles, led to some people kind of looking for a reason to doubt them, is that Harden can slow the game down to a crawl and get 3 points one way or the other, either by, getting an open shot for himself, a teammate, or getting to the line for 3 free throws. And that sort of ability to really play with pace in a crunch time scenario, that has a tendency to really, throw off the other team. And if your other team is the likes of, Boston, who has had some offensive struggles this year, particularly when, Tatum's been off the floor, and now that Brown is out of the mix entirely, the Bucks, who from a half court offense standpoint can get extremely stagnant, and the Sixers, who have a second team that is, fifth percentile offense in the NBA. Those are all huge questions, huge problems. If Harden, does what we've seen him do time in, time out against, overmatched opponents and just slows the game down like that. And I guess the idea that defense doesn't matter in the NBA playoffs is tough to swallow, especially considering what the Heat and the Lakers did last year. But we're not that far removed from, the Steph Curry, the Steph Curry, Kevin Durant Warriors, who were just absolutely untouchable offensively. And they could have won some of those titles, particularly the finals against the Cavs, defense as optional. So it's, I think it's possible.
But those teams were significantly better than what this Nets team puts out there. The Warriors had teams that were top 5 defensive efficiency. I don't know if KD was on any of those, but it just, when you have those two guys out there, it just seems like there's going to be problems.
Yeah, I think Harden is a little underappreciated for his defense. Clearly he's not a plus defender, but he's not a huge minus. And then similarly, Kyrie, anytime you're looking specifically at guard defense, I tend to downweight that relative to, what your ability to protect the rim. And for the most part, where the Nets lack defensive quality, it to me looks like an effort level. Mostly, They're not switching especially aggressively. They're not, their defensive scheme is not especially complicated to break down, and they're giving up advantage looks to their opponents. Presumably, a lot of that is fixable if you can turn up the intensity, and that's kind of what we have seen teams like this do in the playoffs, and it's been made a meaningful difference. Now, this is still, it's still speculative and still, it's tough for me to look past a guy who is as good as Kevin Durant is, guys as good as James Harden is, and say that anyone, will match up with them score for score across this Eastern Conference particularly. Where I think the Nets are going to find a huge issue is the finals. Mm. They're going up against a Kawhi-led Clippers. They're going up against a LeBron-led Lakers. They're going to be in trouble. And most of that just comes down to ability to kind of dictate the way the game is played in the final quarter. guy like Kawhi finding his shot anywhere he wants it on the floor at any time in the fourth quarter against a team like the Nets is going to be a problem. Similarly, LeBron, getting his way in the fourth quarter of games against the Nets, I could see being a problem. So I think ultimately the Nets, I'm much less concerned about them emerging from the Eastern Conference. But your points are valid, and they probably do show up in meaningful ways in the finals.
So is plus 210 a forgiving enough number for you to actually bet the Nets to win the finals, or do your concerns make it to the point where you want to avoid them in that market and just focus all your bankroll on them winning the East?
The only real reason to get involved with the Nets in the finals instead of keying them for the East is if there is an especially bad path for the Lakers. Mm-hmm. Like, let's say for whatever reason the chips land and they're in the 3-6 matchup against the Clippers round one. All of a sudden, I'm a lot more interested in the Nets to win the finals.
Right.
If they're basically if either the Lakers or the Clippers end up with a especially difficult path, then the Nets become valuable finals wise. Otherwise, I'm only have eyes for them for the East, honestly.
So do you find any other value in the championship market right now, or is it a situation where you want to see how the seeds shake out and then react to that and then dive into the championship market?
Yeah, I think you're going to get your best price that you're going to see all season on the Lakers to win the title right now. Okay. Plus 550 is as good as it's going to be. If they end up against the Clippers in round one, that's obviously not good. But I don't think plus 550 turns into plus 700 all of a sudden.
Right.
And from basically just kind of reading the market and seeing the way that these numbers have moved over the season, it's pretty obvious that little ticks in favor, making the Lakers and the Nets a little bit more, a little bit more enticing, have generated decent action. Like they're taking, they're writing significant bets with small moves on these teams, from what I can tell you. So I doubt that we see better than plus 550, which that I'm inclined to get more involved here with the Lakers at plus 550, and dream matchup for them. Jazz round one in the 2-7, Clippers round two in the 3-7, and then Suns round Western Conference Finals and I think ultimately they can get through that path, barring significant injury to Anthony Davis.
And again, identifying the right time to buy, a big part of your process and a big part of why we have you on the show to talk about all this stuff. That is Drew Disnick. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at whale_capper and check him out on the Bet the Edge podcast for NBC Sports Edge. Also, can still find the Deep Dive podcast as well. Drew, we appreciate it. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to talk to us for today. Good luck with you for the remainder of the regular season, and good luck in the playoffs as well.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys. Best of luck.
Covering the future.
Big thank you once again to Drew Disnick for swinging by and breaking down his NBA futures thoughts. And I think that it makes sense the Lakers would be plus 550 right now, given that LeBron's banged up, AD's not fully healthy. But as Drew was talking about after we got done recording, like he couldn't get plus 250 at one point on this team, much less, plus 550. So it's identifying those spots to buy, and it seems like he's pretty into LeBron being at full health as of right now, even though he hasn't come back yet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, LeBron's played 2 games in the last however many months, right? So right. I got to think that's what the market's considering right now, and maybe they're saving him, maybe they're not rushing him back. But then, being the 7th seed, you don't have any ways of easing your way into the playoffs either. So I think that's just what leads to the massive intrigue with the playoffs this year, right? I mean, the best player on the planet has been hurt. Can he come back like he did last year and play really well and win the title? Yeah, of course it's possible. You also have to remember last year that they ducked the Clippers and the Bucks, the 2 teams that were considered the other 2 primary contenders going into those playoffs. So just all kinds of storylines. I think it's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, it'll be fun to watch. And I think that with LeBron, whenever there have been situations where we have doubted him for whatever reason, it's kind of been a situation where LeBron has said, nah, I'm still pretty good. So we'll see how that plays out. Did Drew talk you into any futures for the NBA here, whether it be a Nets in the East, any Lakers futures? Did he talk you into anything here, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like his logic on Charlotte sitting there at the 8th spot and the way you can kind of hedge that as well. Obviously, I haven't had time to do anything about it yet, but I think that one kind of sticks out most.
Yeah.
And no, I mean, I'm definitely looking forward to betting some NBA playoffs. I'll give Adam Stanko a call before I bet anything else. But I think the Charlotte one, from what he said, sticks out in my mind.
Yeah, plus 172 to make the playoffs there for Charlotte. So that should be good. And Ed, maybe some more covering the future NBA talk with you once we get into the playoffs, or maybe not yet?
We'll see. I'm certainly not going to originate any number.
Right.
For sure. And it kind of depends. There's kind of some interesting opportunities to bet the NBA playoffs when you see a mismatch between the game one spread and the series price. Which, of course, is more complicated this year because of reduced home court and blah, blah, blah. But anyways, when you see that kind of mismatch, you could potentially bet it. But I don't know if that's going to fall on a Wednesday when we're recording.
Right.
So, but I definitely, if I do see any of those mismatch prices, I am going to write about it in my email newsletter. So,
okay.
So that's
another reason to subscribe to the email newsletter at the Power Rank for sure. For my covering the future for this week, I want to talk some NFL win totals because those are up right now on FanDuel Sportsbook for the first time, and they'll likely be a focus for me for the next couple episodes, trying to dabble in this win total market because I am building out my win total projections for the first time and want to see what they can do. Wanted to dive in here first by taking some risk and talking about the Patriots under 9 wins, which is even money right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. I currently have the Patriots offense being better this year. I'm projecting them to step up from where they were last year, and given the improvements they made with their pass catchers, I still have them as being a top 5 offensive line, even without Joe Thuney. Their skill guys are better, great offensive line. It's a better situation what they had last year. And plus, if Cam's healthy or if Mac Jones pans out, that could help too. But even when I project their passing offense to be better than it was last year, I still have them at 7.6 wins right now. Part of that is because their opponents have improved too. The Dolphins win total is 9.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. I had them at 9.6. The Jets win total is 6.0. I had them at 6.0 as well. I also like the Bills more than their 10.5 win total, but it's minus 170 on the over. Tough for me to bet them with that much juice on it. So basically what my numbers are saying is that the AFC East will be pretty good this year, with the Jets and the Dolphins meeting expectations, the Bills potentially exceeding them. That puts the Patriots in a pretty tough spot. It's not a super easy schedule. If you look at their additional Week 17 game, that's against Dallas. My numbers like Dallas a lot this year. They get the Browns and the Chargers as their flex opponents. I think both those teams grade out pretty well too, with good passing efficiency. So it's a tough schedule combined with what I think is obviously I wouldn't do it if I didn't think it was fair. I think it's fair pessimism around, or skepticism is the better way to phrase that. Fair skepticism around what their offense will do this year. That's enough for me to actually take the dive here and plug under 9 wins at plus 100. They have to go 500, over 500 to get you 9 wins. And I'm skeptical that they get there. So I do want the Patriots under 9 wins at plus 100 as my first win total bet of the year. And Ed, we didn't ask Kevin specifically about the Patriots win total, but it seemed like he echoed my thoughts last week in being more glowing about Washington and being more measured with the praise of New England and their gains. I know you haven't run your numbers yet for this year, but what are your thoughts on the Patriots, given all the changes they've made? But to me, I think there are still reasons for questions there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are reasons for questions. I don't know how much better the offense is going to get. I mean, you're probably going to be in a platoon situation with both Cam Newton and Mac Jones. How's that going to go? I don't know. I mean, I'm very high on Mac Jones, but all NFL rookies struggle. Right. Rookie quarterbacks struggle, right? I guess the thing, if you're betting under right now, the thing I would worry about is regression on their defense, positive regression, right? So you had a lot of guys. You had a secondary, Stephon Gilmore, Jonathan Jones, J.C. Jackson, that was lights out in 2019. and then really took a plunge last year, more so than we could kind of ever expect. So, what's Belichick going to do on the defensive side of the ball? I mean, if those guys play like they did in 2019, I would not. I would not go under the win total. So big question mark there. Those are the types of things that stand out. And you mentioned that I haven't run my model yet. I actually don't have a model for NFL win totals. Yeah. In the sense that I don't have a way. I use market win totals to do kind of my preseason ratings, and that's been an so crucial part of my model all year long for NFL. But I actually don't take data from last year and to project out what a rating for teams should be this year. I found there's just too much regression to the mean to do that in any way that I personally know how. So there's no model in that sense for betting NFL win totals. It's very different in college where, I do have a model. So, there's actually no NFL model to be run. Well, I will use market information and kind of looking forward to week 1 to betting those things.
So with regards to the defense, I think that's a very fair thing to bring up because they were an outlier 2 years ago and weren't as good last year. But looking at what I have them ranked 10th in schedule adjusted pass defense for this upcoming year. That's based on a lot of manual tinkering. I will say that it's not like a super scientific process, but based on additions they've made, based on guys who opted out coming back, stuff like that. I had them 10th in pass defense. So that's still pretty good. And that's the second biggest component in the model after passing offense.
Sure.
So 10th might be conservative. They could outperform that for sure, definitely.
Right.
But I think that 10th is still viewing them as being a positive for that team overall.
Yeah, I think 10th would be positive, right? I mean, they were a definitive second in 2019. They were maybe last for good parts of last season before they started playing a little bit better towards the end of the season. So I think everything is with the secondary there. What can Belichick do on that side of the ball? And it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, but being high on the AFC East in general has not been a profitable thought process previously, but we'll see if that can change this time around. That is all that we have for today here on Covering the Spread. Ed, you mentioned might be plugging some stuff in your email newsletter. What else is going on for you over at the Power Rank?
Yeah, no, in the email newsletter, actually, this will go out later this week, but writing a little bit about closing line value. And this is not actually work that originates with me. I'm not a professional bettor. I'm a quant that bets. So I just want to be clear about that. And in terms of talking about things that bettors really care about in terms of closing line value, I really rely on other people who are pros. So it was part of my learning process to understand exactly why you should think about closing line value, and in particular, what percentage of games you want to have closing line value to think that that you're going to be profitable in the long run. Is it 60? Is it 70? Is it 90?
Right.
So you can check that out at thepowerrank.com. In my free email newsletter.
Okay. Anything over on the Football Analytics show that we can check out as well?
Not this week, but I am actually very excited about the next 2 weeks. So I will let you know then.
Subscribe now so you get notifications for when those go live on the Football Analytics show. Make sure you follow Ed on Twitter as well at the Power Rank. I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Drew Disnick for swinging by and breaking down his NBA futures thoughts. Get a link to his new podcast in the show notes up on numberFire.com and follow him on Twitter at whale_capper. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you with your NBA futures bets. If you're betting on that crazy, crazy Sunday or anything else, we'll talk to you once again in the very near future. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.